Hey, Stani, glad you can join us in the Stanford Blockchain Club. So I would love to learn more about Lens. You often say that Lens is like a decentralized social layer for Web3. So I'm just curious. So what did on-chain social look like before Lens? And how do you think Lens will revolutionize the on-chain social for Web3?
Thanks for having me here. It's definitely a good opportunity to talk about Lens because it really touches pretty much everyone because we're all creating social connections, whether it's in our private lives, in schools, online, even more so. Lens is what it tries to do is it uses decentralized technologies to actually empower the users and creators by bringing them ownership that creates more choice of how social media will be built in the future. So there's a big part that is secured by the blockchain. So for example, every profile that is created on Lens is secured by the blockchain. Your audience, the connections you're making over the internet are also secured by the blockchain. And also we're using decentralized storage to ensure that the content that you might create that is also available in the future. So some interesting thoughts that I had is that what happens that if some of the blogging platforms in the future goes out of business, what happens to all the content that happens to all the interesting research papers that we publish, culturally relevant articles and findings and so forth. So effectively, Lens creates the user's identity that they can own online, and that's pretty much what the on-chain component is. For Nord's perspective, it's a stack built new social experiences without having the cold start issue. So because Lens is a shared network, it means that if you build a game or a new social media application, you can leverage the existing user base for your experience building.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So do you think that there are any like Web2 equivalents to Lens? Or do you think that or if so, what are they? And if not, like, why not?
Yeah, so I think even like going back to the previous question about what existed before Lens, I think in some ways I see each and every blockchain network as a social graph, and it has social events, whether it's DeFi summer, NFT summer, or some other social that brings people together to engage with. But Lens makes it just more as a protocol and kind of like a programmable as well. So you actually can create a profile and identity into that profile. And in that world, I think internet was built in a decentralized way, but we kind of choose to have more centralized aspect and actually choose to use platforms because they helped us to share content and create. So, and web was, it did have elements of composability. And a good example of that is RSS feeds, for example, that, all the platforms are providing feeds of the content that they produce. So there's kind of like ingredients of composability, but I think you really need that Web3 technology, which is the blockchain, decentralized storage, to actually enable the ownership and user choice. So it's easier and more effective to build it in a Web3 environment than it has been in the past.
That's really interesting. And I know that you guys are making your first move on Polygon. So I'm wondering how you see Lens and its potentially like cross-chain future, because it's increasingly obvious that like there's not going to be one single chain that's going to dominate the entire space. So how do you see Lens interacting with a cross-chain future?
Yeah, no, I do agree that each network is its own community, meaning that people will not be on the same network. That's just it's not feasible. I do think that Lens is a social layer of Web3, so it means that it's beneficial if it existed everywhere, and it's built also in a way that protocol can exist pretty much on any network. And I do believe that there's some sort of possibility that's needed between all these networks, but effectively down the line, what we want to see is that if Lens protocol works well in its current form and actually has protocol market fit, the community can expand that network into other that protocol into other networks. It hasn't happened yet because it's still quite early. I mean, we've been a bit over than 1 year in mainnet, so we're very early stage in terms of the experimentation. But I do see that that's the way to go forward.
Okay. And what about like hurdles? So how have you gone like onboarding users onto Lens, and what have been some of like the challenges in terms of getting users actually interacting in like a Web3 social?
Yeah, I would say that it's been relatively easy because the focus has been onboarding Web3 users who are talking to Web3 audiences. So Web3 creators, people who use frequently and are in this space, for example. But the next step is that as we kind of like bootstrap the network with people who are more native to what Web3 can do and its benefits, we want to actually expand the protocol access to more traditional audiences. And that's a question of user experience and the design itself. So if you use one of the clients that are built on Lens, for example, Orb or Butterfly, the way they work is that they reflect quite a way. So you don't have to wait a blockchain confirmation. In fact, all the blockchain logic is actually abstracted away from the user. So the next step is to about like, how do we actually make the experience so easy that the users don't need to think about blockchain-based addresses, and they're able to onboard directly with their email or phone number. And I think that's the direction we're heading with the onboarding, and where the kind of like the last points of friction we need to solve.
So you kind of see that like in order to onboard like the next actual billion users and stuff, the future or like the end game for like a social thing has to be kind of like a Web 2.5. So something that is familiar enough for people to actually easily onboard without any technical prerequisite. Is that kind of like the end goal here?
I do like to avoid always the word of Web 2.5. I do think the experience should be familiar. So I do think that email and phone numbers play a role of actually making the access as good as possible. But we should not do that by sacrificing the concept of ownership, ownership of your profile and the security that it provides. But I do think there's a lot of I would say kind of opportunity to use account abstraction to actually make that process more smoother without compromising the true nature of Web3. But in short, if you want people to use these applications and the technology, it really has to feel as anything else that they've been experimenting, or even more easier.
Yeah, that's totally makes sense. So how would you say like it's because it's like an infrastructure project, how do you that's very different from like existing social media platforms that like run ads or whatever. So how do you see Lens like monetize, and potentially how would its future like tokenomics and stuff work?
In terms of monetization, it's something we haven't really thought about too much because we've been focusing on building something that is useful and valuable for the end users, and basically seeing that whether actually it's something that people like to use and it's helpful and helps them to experience social in a new way, or regain excitement about social because of the Web3 elements and the benefit it provides. But I would say that because it's a shared network, it also means that the actual monetization layer can be shared as well.
Okay.
What I mean by that is that a creator might create a content in one application, a client, and it might be mirrored in another client, and someone might collect that content. So you can collect content as NFTs the same way as you can collect art NFTs or music NFTs. It's basically extended to pretty much generated content. So what's fascinating is that you could actually share monetization between all those clients, also the algorithms that help to find that content, surface it, and also between the creators and whoever amplified that content. So you actually have a monetization layer that benefits all in the kind of like a content supply chain. So I think that will be the direction, and I do think that's quite empowering because it really doesn't exist in Web 2.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Again, like moving on to a new direction is that a problem that we've seen existing social media giants face is a problem of content moderation. And like, how do you balance between censorship and how do you balance between like making sure that the community is safe for everyone? So how do you see that play out in Lens? And or do you think that this is an issue at all for what you're building right now, or is this something that only top layer applications should deal with?
No, it's an issue everywhere. If we're talking about the internet, it's the beauty of the internet is that it creates the access. So we all have ability to talk about things, contribute, and comment things. So it's really democratizing technology. Same goes for blockchain. But that also comes with a responsibility. So I think the big difference between what's happening with content moderation and trust and safety in Web 2 versus what we could have in Web 3 is that currently there is a lack of choice. So if you are not happy with the way the content is moderated on a particular platform, you really don't have a choice of actually subscribing to a different kind of a policy that is more aligned with your values, or neither there is actually a competing policies that are widening civic experience and moderation. And with Lens, the idea is that because the users have ownership, they could actually quite easily move from one application to another. I have this concept called the liquid citizen. Means that you could actually, in a Web3 environment, there isn't that many modes available because everyone is pretty much building decentralized open source technology, and the users can move relatively quickly from one protocol to another, one application to another. So that choice actually results to more innovation because we have to think about new ways of retaining users and think about what are those policies that we need to create that actually retains those users in the applications that we build for them. And that choice is what creates better outcomes, in my opinion, for content moderation as well.
That's really interesting. So if my understanding is correctly, would you say that your key observation here is that like the reason why like social media giants have evolved into the way that they are in form of an oligopoly is just because they control the underlying social graphs. So if you free those social graphs up to everyone, it's very easy to bootstrap the next Facebook or the next Instagram and stuff like that. Is that basically what you're trying to build here?
Yeah, and in some ways, if the platform is open for computation, third-party computation, it also means that everyone has a democratic access to compute and build those algorithms. So we could actually subscribe to algorithms that might actually be more healthier for us, and where they might find things that we are good for us, for example, or align with our values. So that open design space creates those contributions that do not exist in the current social media landscape.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Because I'm actually curious. So you say like the open design say. So what do you think are like some user-driven features or improvements or applications on Lens that you as a team could not have anticipated before? What are some of your favorites?
I'm super excited on more novel use cases. So, for example, one project called Enzo Collective, and they're using Lens protocol to create a digital wardrobe. So you can create different kinds of digital items that you could wear and store in your wardrobe, and you can basically you can actually share different kinds of things, and you're kind of like using the Lens protocol as a way to empower that networking. And anyone who has a Lens profile pretty much can participate in some way to that use case in that application. So that's super fascinating. And also, algorithms are quite fascinating. So because all the data is public, so we start to see first algorithms being built on top of Lens protocol, different kinds of reputation scores, content recommendation algorithms, and also basically who to follow algorithms. So it's getting quite exciting. And many of the clients, they kind of like have similar needs, but they're starting to actually think about how they could actually differentiate. And I think that's where things become interesting, because your profile is portable, but then depending on the client, the application, it depends what you actually will see and experience, which actually becomes quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm really curious about the idea of like, for example, like the digital wardrobe and like the bridging of like real world assets in general. So how do you see Lens in kind of like playing a role in bridging like on-chain assets with actual off-chain assets?
Well, I think Lens is in a position where it's going to be the distribution aspect. So if you have a interesting idea and you have followers, you can use the protocol to distribute your messaging across. So we actually see quite often that a lot of Web3 projects, they create a Lens profile to communicate with their audiences in a non-custodial, decentralized way. So it's kind of like a voice and a channel. But I do see that there's ability for some sort of a way to create like a commerce on top of the Lens protocol that is empowering that aspect. But how to actually do it and tie the physical part is going to be exciting and equally as challenging problem to solve as Lens itself is.
Of course. Yeah, another I guess very interesting avenue to look at, especially in this current market climate, is that you know, governments and like legal challenges, especially because we have already seen how like Facebook and like all of these other traditional media, social media giants have faced government scrutiny. So do you believe that you're going to face similar government scrutiny with regards to Lens and other decentralized social protocols?
Well, I do believe that as a protocol, it does provide more transparency, also more access to computation, meaning more better outcomes for the users, and also user ownership. So it's a technology that just has a lot of those benefits that actually the social media is suffering today. So I do think that some sort of guidance and regulation might be helpful if the industry itself isn't able to do so. But I think the biggest regulator for Lens protocol will be the users itself. And not only made by governments, but actually that's if you build something very evil, the users they have choice to actually not to use it. You know, if Twitter becomes something evil today, there's less of a choice not to use it actually. So I do like the idea of when you bring this kind of like a flexibility, the actual true regulator is the user.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So again, like our final like proper question before we move into like just some bonus rapid fire questions is how do you think like Web3 social will disrupt kind of existing social media giants? So will Web3 social replace Web2 or do you think they will coexist and why?
I think will coexist, and I think those folks that are using Web2 platforms, they have maybe networks there. Those networks are quite strong. I do think that the more we can build on Web3, the more chance we will see like Web3 dominated social networks. So I think that the new interesting use cases are the ones that actually will bring adoption for Web3 social.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And then now, as we move up onto the last 5 minutes, I guess we'll do like a quick rapid fire round. These are spicy questions crowdsourced from the SBC. So first, and then I guess we'll do like 15 seconds for each one. So first of all, how can we solve crypto's bad name / PR crisis?
I think by continuing building relevant, exciting use cases beyond finance, I think being able to build tangible use cases will be super exciting because that's what people in mainstream can actually see in a tangible way.
That's cool. Yeah. So if you had the choice, would you eliminate all of centralized finance?
Not really, because centralized finance can be also cost effective if it's done right. In some cases, it's not done right, and there's issues. So I wouldn't like kill it completely, but I see the value of it as well.
Of course. So, but also, if DeFi is so nascent, why do you think like decentralized social is so important at this juncture?
I think we have to show that Web3 has more use cases than finance. Actually, because we make connections on a daily basis and we spend a lot of time on creating identity, we should actually own and preserve the identity. It doesn't make sense that we own the money and assets that we have, but we don't own actually our own identity.
Yeah. So what do you think will cause the next bull market?
I don't really track markets that much, but I do think if we build some fascinating use cases that are very tangible, as I mentioned, I think that really brings out the power of what we can actually build.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on what are your thoughts on Zuzalu?
I mean, it looked like a very cool hippie, kind of like a community in some ways. I think it was quite an interesting experience. And I wasn't there physically, but I did attend in some of the panels. And I think we should have more experimentations like that in the future.
Yeah. And last of all, what would you name your kid? I know that this is probably a very relevant question right now. So yeah, congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
But yeah, what would you name your kid?
I think Go could be a good name.
Go. Okay. Yeah. Like it's not right on your hat, right? You're already prepping all of the merch right there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us.